Hey, it's Farro GEEKTOOLKIT, and I am super excited today because they sent me a laser. Atomstack sent me an A5 M40 laser, which is one of their newer models. It's an upgrade from the A5 M40 Pro. Now, it's a 40-watt laser with a 5.5-watt laser diode. If you're new to my channel, I talk about gadgets, I talk about gizmos, I like to talk about Arduinos, Raspberry Pis, 3D printing, and laser cutters, but I haven't had one yet to talk about. So this is going to be my first review of one, and as such, I'll talk about the technologies and some of the things I learned about the hobby along the way. Here we go. The big thing I want to do in this video is talk about the hobby and things I learned, because there were a lot of things that surprised me. For instance, can I cut records? Can I cut clear acrylic? What is a diode laser versus a CO2? All of this stuff. So we're going to go into that in this video. But first, let's talk about the specs. It's a 410 millimeter by 400 millimeter work area. Now, what that means is it's about 15 inches by 16 inches, which is really, really large. The other thing that's really important to know that I learned about the hobby is it doesn't matter how big the machine is because you have to put an enclosure over it to be safe. The enclosure helps by sucking out fumes. So there's an active fan here. That's what this cable is. And it sucks fumes out and sends them out the window. That is super important because you have really no idea what you're cutting through sometimes. If you're cutting plywood, you're hitting glue, those fumes are not things you want to breathe. You don't want to breathe the soot. So anyway, you have a thing that sends it out almost like a chimney, but you have to have an active fan. It has to come off the top because that's where the fumes go naturally. So the reason I say all that is the size of this thing has taken over this corner of the room, as you can see, because the size is one thing, but the enclosure on top of it is another. You're going to want an enclosure because it's an open air design. The other thing about this laser to understand is a 5.5 watt, but it is a 0.16 by 0.19 millimeter focus beam. The reason that's important is say you have like two cars that are both the same horsepower, but one is faster and performs better because it's tuned more. In lasers, the size of the focus beam is how much that 5.5 watts energy gets focused down to be how fast it can cut or how efficient it can engrave, how sharp everything looks. Okay, so you can think about it that way. If you compare it to another 5.5 watt laser, it doesn't have that tight of a beam. You're going to end up with a more oblong shape, less focus, and so on. So it has a very tight beam, which is one of the big features they put on this. The other thing that they did is they made the focus really, really easy. So it comes with this little 2 millimeter acrylic slot. You put it under there, and then it has a Z screw that lowers down. And when the laser is on top of this, it is basically focused. You remove this out from under the work, and you are there. Now, it is a fixed focus, which means the thing you cut has to be flat. Keep that in mind. If you're cutting something rounded, you're going to be out of focus. You're going to end up with different edges. The other thing I learned is the laser has to be level. Not leveled like a 3D printer, but literally, you want the laser and the workpiece to be the exact same distance all the way across. Now, it comes with feet. It's very easy to level unless you do something dumb like I did, which was I put it on a piece of vinyl on one side by mistake. That will throw everything off. So if you see weird things where you're cutting through on one side, not the other, make sure it's level. Other than that, this was about a 20 to 30 minute setup and install as far as the build. And then the software was literally, it's a USB cable. You put it in the computer, you download the software, and it connects and you go. I was really, really impressed with how fluid everything was. I was really impressed with the instructions for assembly. They said it would take 10 to 20 minutes. I went a bit slower. I actually think I was about 35 to 40 minutes for me because I was going a lot slower because if I put together IKEA furniture, I always screw it up. I always do something wrong. So I didn't want to screw it up. I wanted to follow everything very closely and make sure that if I was careful to see how long it took. It still only took 40 minutes and it was together and up and running right off the bat. Super cool. There were no funky drivers to install. I launched Laser Gerbil. It said, do you want a CH340 driver, which is pretty typical if you've ever worked with an Arduino. You install that driver and then it can talk serial communication right to the laser. And so it was very cool. There was no like weird software package or anything. It uses Gerbil firmware, which is an open source firmware. That means that you have a whole variety of different laser packages of software you can use. I really appreciate that because I've been burned by proprietary software before in the past where it either didn't keep up or it got dropped entirely out of support. So having an open source firmware that can use other things, I get better performance out of it. I'm going to get better competitiveness between those software packages. And I get to choose, do I want to go with a free software that might be a little bit harder to use, or do I want to go for the pay software that might have some powerful features? So I love that I don't have to worry about the company building the hardware to also try to be building software. That's just really hard to do, and it's cool to just not have to worry about that. My favorite software that I use is called Lightburn. Lightburn is $60 for this device. It's a Gerbil license that gives you 1 year of updates. It's a one-time fee, and then you own the software. You can put it on 2 different computers, and it works on Linux, OS X, and Windows. It doesn't seem to take a lot of power to do any of this stuff. If you've ever used a Cricut, then or like a vinyl cutter, then you'll pretty much understand the software almost intuitively. It's basically a 2D layout, and you lay out your lines, you say what you want to cut, and go from there. Now, the interesting thing about lasers is they have 3 different things they can do. They can cut, engrave, and mark. Okay, so for the materials that you put in this, if you put wood in this, it can cut up to 6 millimeters of wood. It can engrave wood as well, and then marking is irrelevant if you can engrave. The reason I bring up marking is one of the top questions I saw is, can this engrave metal? And there's actually kind of almost like conflicting data, because people say, yeah, it does. Here's my project where it engraves metal. Here's the thing about metal. There's sometimes layers on top of metal, or sometimes they sell metal that's made specifically for laser engraving. I'll give you an example of that. These are like business cards. These are actually metallic, but they've got a paint layer on them. So what happens with this is I put this in the laser and it will mark it by taking the paint off the metal. So I have a permanent marking on these business cards. It didn't actually engrave the metal, but as far as anyone grabbing this, it looks to them like they've got a metal business card with markings on it. So that's what I mean by marking. They actually have spray paint. They can spray onto like metal tumblers and stuff like that, and you can actually permanently mark on metal. So that's something to understand. There's marking versus engraving. Does it actually cut the metal away? No, you can't do it with a diode laser. It just doesn't have the power. The only thing that can actually engrave that I'm aware of is something like a fiber laser, and then you're talking a much, much more expensive machine. I'm not even sure CO2 lasers can do it, but even then, CO2 lasers, again, much more expensive machine. And since I mentioned CO2 lasers, let me tell you, this is a diode laser. And that means that it uses visible light to heat the item, alter its composition, so that to cut or whatever. The reason that's important is it's a visible light versus a CO2 laser, which uses infrared. What does that mean? It means you can't cut clear acrylic with this. Matter of fact, the more clear the acrylic is, the less it's going to see it, or it might even just go right through it. Same with glass. You can't actually cut or etch glass with this. Now, a note about the hobby, for everything I say you can't do, somebody has figured out a technique to either simulate it or get you close. For instance, under acrylic, you can put some things that will heat, and then that can etch the acrylic from the backside, so on like that. So you'll hear a lot about techniques and so on. But it's something that if you're trying to cut clear acrylic, a diode laser is just not the technology for you. And I just thought that was a really interesting concept, that one is a visible light where CO2 uses infrared. So what can you do with this? You can cut and engrave wood up to 6 millimeters. You can actually engrave tile, which is awesome. There's this, again, techniques. I'm going to talk a lot about techniques. There's a technique for tile called the NWT method that I'll get into in another video, but it makes tiles look beautiful. And the big thing about a tile versus wood is there's no grain on the tile, so you can really see the resolution shine through. And it makes up for a beautiful piece that you can hang on the wall, put into a kitchen or something. There's just some really cool stuff you can do with tile. Another thing you can do with this is you can actually cut leather or etch leather. I just thought that was really cool. I never thought about actually being able to put pictures in the leather, and I'll show you a project that I did where I actually did that with 4, I call them, human bodies and suits basically. But I was able to do that with a planner that has like, grid paper and calendar and all that stuff in it. I'm super proud of that project, and this is one of my first major projects I did with this, where I like end to end did something other than like cutting squares and so on to test it out. Another thing about the laser hobby is this stuff does take a bit of time. Every material that I talk about takes a bit of time to dial in. You basically get these test files, you run the test file, and that finds out how fast you can cut and how much power you need to cut through it. The power is typically a percentage. So for instance, if I'm etching wood, I might go at, so many millimeters per minute at a certain, like, let's say 40-45% on a certain material. Then when I switch to a different material, and that could be going from like pine to birch, let's say, I have to go dial it in again. And that was interesting to me because it's very different than a lot of other hobbies. Like for me, you dial in a printer for PLA and maybe for sports, but for 3D printing, you just kind of, once you get there, you go. For this one here, I felt like every time I was doing a different project, I had to dial in for the material, the speed, and then sometimes even the art file, like, you know, tuning the art file. If you're doing etching especially, you need to tune your contrast and so on. So you do a lot of testing, a lot of little things, get things dialed in, then you do your big project. I just thought that was cool. This makes it really easy to do all that because of being able to use all these different softwares and because of community. Okay, so to dial it in, how does that relate to this? Well, to do that, you use test files. And what you're gonna want is test files that are made for this device from the community that are freely available. That's the best way to do it. I mean, otherwise you're having to buy them off of, like, you know, Etsy or something like that. One thing I wanna say is the Atomstack community and Facebook and even Reddit is awesome. Now, I've been in the Facebook group for both the 40 watt group for Atomstack, which is specific to the 40 watt machines, and their just general Facebook group. And the community has been friendly. They've been sharing a ton of projects. And that's important because you can tell when you join the community, if you see a ton of problems, then you know, uh-oh, you know, maybe this isn't the thing I want to get into. But if you see a ton of projects, well, that's great. And that's what I've been seeing is a ton of people sharing techniques, projects, and helping each other out. So that community also has a file area where they have all of the test files. So you can just get a test file, run the test file, and it will do all of the speeds and everything in a grid for you. Then you can basically dial in your materials, and that just saves you time, makes things so much better. One of the things that I want to talk about is the changes from the M40 Pro. They made a knob that you turn to focus this laser that makes it super easy to focus. You basically turn the knob, go down to the acrylic piece, turn the knob the other way, and you're focused in. And that is a great thing because the old way you had to use an Allen wrench and like dial it in and all. And then every time you were basically dealing with that Allen wrench. This one here, it's very, very simple. I never had any problems dialing it in for my focus. And you want that focus to get that really tight beam because that's going to get you the resolution and all of the power that you want. So focusing is everything. I actually did a couple cuts out of focus. I did one cut where I was actually out of square and saw the impact of that. You really want it to be focused, but when you're in, it's awesome. So what is it missing? Well, the enclosure I talked about. You're going to want an enclosure. You're going to want a window on the enclosure. This is just an orange thick piece of acrylic that helps block it. Now it has a piece of acrylic on the laser, but I just feel like I want something else between my eyes besides that. And then also I wear safety glasses whenever I have it on. Now it came with safety glasses. You may want to shop around for more comfortable ones, more stylish ones, whatever. I'm happy with the ones they gave me because I typically have safety glasses, this acrylic, and the acrylic on there. The other thing that the acrylic on the laser does that's super important is it prevents pets from getting their paws in the laser. So if you have a cat, which I do, they might get really fascinated with this thing. It moves around. It's a low dot of light. The enclosure helps, but just having that in there so that they can't get their paw in there is a bit comfortable. A couple other things that you're going to want to think about when you have this. Well, you're going to want stock, right? You're going to stock being, you know, leather, wood, and so on. The one thing I found is going to hobby stores locally. I've gotten better prices than going on to Amazon or even online. So that's something to be aware of. Is sometimes those are not the items that are going to be best bought online. They're best bought in like hobby stores. A couple other things that you're going to want to know about that you may have to buy for this thing. You're probably going to want to buy some kind of metallic tray. They call them a honeycomb tray. This is to basically go under your workpiece. This will get you better airflow under the workpiece, and it'll also let the pieces drop. It lets the laser go through, but it protects your table, which is super important because if you think about cutting, you have to have something under it. It comes with a piece of metal, but it's much smaller than the full area, and it doesn't have any air under it, which is super important. Speaking of air, the other thing you'll want to look at is what's called an air assist. An air assist is a tube that blows air onto this. Now, there's a couple of different projects in the Facebook groups of people that have built this. You can find other YouTube videos of people that have built everything from like 3D printed ones to metal bending ones and so on. What the air assist does is it takes air and it forces it right where the laser's hitting. That's going to cool the material faster, which can help prevent flame ups. It also will blow out any of the chunks. We have a concept in CNC of like recutting, right? Where you're going over where you've already cut and you're cutting through the sawdust or whatever, the material. The same concept happens in a laser. When you go over a layer and you're doing like 3 or 4 passes, which is very common for a cut, you're basically recharring what's in that cut. Having an air assist blow that out will get you a faster, cleaner cut, and you'll get less charring on it. So an air assist is something that you'll probably want to look into with this laser as an accessory. Finally, the other thing you're really going to want is a power kill switch. It looks like this. They have a couple on Amazon. You're going to want some way to turn this thing off as an emergency. Now, they do include a switch. It's over by the control thing. I just feel like having something a bit more beefy and with an emergency circuit on it would be a little bit better than the switch it came with. But it's nice that they at least included a switch. That was another upgrade from the older version, is they at least have an on-off switch now, so you don't have to like pull power on it. So a couple of projects I've done with this. I did a couple of basic cuts with it just to kind of get used to it. Then I started getting into etching because I was super excited to etch wood. I did a couple of different things dialing it in. And then I tried the borax method where you take a bit of borax, like 1 to 10 mix of borax to water, and you paint the board. And then I did a Boba Fett cut to celebrate the book of Boba Fett coming out. Now, not only do I love the show, but I love how this came out, but it comes out black, which is really cool. You get a really good dark contrast when you put that borax down. It's a really cool technique. I'll do a video on that and just kind of showing these techniques as I learn them to share them with you, because it's, to me, just as important as having a really good laser that's repeatable and safe is also knowing the techniques to get the best use out of it and the most efficient use. So I can run a lot faster, a lot lower power using that borax method and get a lot darker image. The other thing I did is I started playing with leather, and once I realized I could etch leather, I came up with this portfolio that's like, you know, grid paper and paper for notes and a little calendar and all that. And I etched onto it Master Chief and Samus, a couple other characters, and I love that. I think it came out really cool. It's kind of goofy, but I love it. And it was just really cool. It's just the concept of like, I can make leather have, like, I can put artwork on it, and it's almost like printing on leather. It's great. It made the house smell like a burned cow for a little bit, so make sure your air ventilation is set up really well and that you have a really good setup going. Otherwise, it will smell up the room. I've had a couple days where it smelled like I was at a campfire because I didn't have my ventilation going really well. I didn't have my fan pulling in the right spot. I had a hole on the side instead of the top, stuff like that. So, you know, keep that in mind. You're going to want to put this in a place that you don't want to smell like a campfire, and you're going to want to have access where you can blow it out a window or have a vent hole. Now, I'm using a 4-inch tube here. That's something else you're going to want to do when you pick up your enclosure, which is something you'll want. You're going to want a 4-inch vent tube at least, or you can go up to 8 inches or whatever, but the 4 inches is really common, and then you'll want to be able to have that set up along with an active fan. I'll put all this in a description of things I purchased that worked out for me. Okay, I went through a ton of stuff, and here's the reality. When I was playing this video and when I was talking with Atomstack, I said, look, there's too much content for one video. There's just so much to the hobby, and the hobby that ties into the product. So I've talked a lot about the product, things that you can get for the product, the specs of the product. I've shown you things I made with the product. I'll show you things the community has made with the product. But really using it, how to use it, how it works with software is going to take another video. So I will make a video series. I'm going to make a playlist. That'll basically be the Atomstack playlist for this, or maybe I'll make a laser cutter playlist. And if you're interested in this, please sign up, follow that. You can subscribe, and I will get you other content related to this. Also put in the comments below what you'd like to see, what you'd like to know. I have some of the marking stuff coming for marking metal. I'm excited to test that. I have some stuff for the NWT tile method, so I've got a video coming for that as well. And then the borax method, I'll show you that because it's just cool. I really want to dial that in. You know, we just had the holidays, and then we had snowstorms up on the upper northwest of the United States. So the getting material or getting out to go shop for materials to laser has been a bit hard. So I don't have as many demos available as I would have liked for this video, but I will in the future ones now that it's getting a little bit warmer finally outside. So thank you. I hope that was fun, informative. I know it was a lot of info really fast, but the thing is, I've been learning every single time I use this machine. It reminds me of how I felt when I did CNC. Every day I learn a new technique, I learn something new about the machine, I learned something new about the software, or I learned some new thing that I didn't even know you could do. And I'm still learning. So I will share that with you as I learn. This has been an amazing tool. I want to say, just as an overall review thing, this tool has done everything I've asked of it, everything I've wanted it to do. It cuts wood great. I've got a ton of projects I'm going to throw at it against the wood thing. It's etched things the way I expected it to etch them. The resolution looks good. It's been consistent. I haven't had any weird behaviors on it, other than every now and then I have to reboot my computer because the computer communication gets locked up if I stop the like the motor suddenly, or if I like turn it off suddenly, then I'll have to reboot the PC. That's just a communication glitch. That could be anywhere in the software stack. I don't know, but it's not a big deal. I reboot and I'm back up and running, and it only happens when I do like an emergency stop, which I do sometimes because I still screw stuff up because I'm still new at it. I felt like the price being so low, I was going to find myself wanting or not able to do something I wanted to do. That's just not been the case at all. I've been able to do everything. This thing has done everything I've thrown at it, and it's done it great. It probably would be faster if it had a bit more power, or maybe it could cut a bit more wood, but really being able to cut 3mm ply is really, really powerful on its own. So, and it can cut up to 6mm, but for me, 3mm is exactly where I want to be with a lot of projects. You can do quite a bit with that, everything from puzzles and so on. I've also learned that there is a lot of projects you can do with lasers. So I'll show you some pictures of those as well in the B-roll that just kind of blew me away. I want to thank you for watching. I'm Joe Farro, Geek Toolkit. This has been an awesome, awesome experience working with this Atomstack A5. I want to thank Atomstack for sending this out to me. And like I said, I've got more videos coming, and I will show you what I can do. Talk to you soon.